What people who have experienced clinical death see. Clinical death is a state in which a person stops breathing, their heart stops beating, and their brain stops functioning. At this point, the person's body begins to decompose, but the soul continues to live. People who have experienced clinical death report that they saw a bright light that illuminated everything around them. They also said that they felt very calm and light, as if they were in paradise. Some people also talked about seeing their family and friends waiting for them on the other side. My mother-in-law had 2 clinical deaths in a row during her heart attack and many defibrillations. Here she was afterward telling me that she saw not just a corridor and a bright light, but a whole city, where each deceased relative had his own separate house. And everyone is happy and joyful. Everyone is waiting there for their relatives and their further rebirth. For several months after resuscitation, she only lived with these memories. Constantly saying, "Why did they pump me out? It's so beautiful there." But to be honest, her stories were more like a beautiful, memorable dream. An acquaintance rolled mushrooms for the winter and decided to open one jar, good thing not fed her husband and daughter. In short, it became bad for her, she crawled to her neighbor and passed out. The neighbor called an ambulance. And while she was unconscious, she saw her flying down the white corridor to the bright light and she felt so good. The light is getting closer and closer, now she's going to reach it. And suddenly a voice, "Yulia, come back. Come back." She opened her eyes sharply, and the ambulance doctors were above her. People who survive clinical death may have different impressions and memories. Some claim to have seen themselves and doctors from the outside or other unusual phenomena, while others may not remember anything unusual. However, it is worth noting that memories of clinical death can be subjective and depend on individual perception and interpretation of events. An acquaintance spent a couple weeks in a coma. She also told me that there is life there, and nothing ends with leaving. She told about unusual plants and that everything is different, not like here on Earth, as if the air is made of colored energies. You can't touch it, but you can admire it. And it's beautiful. A good friend of mine has experienced clinical death twice. And afterwards she said it was the same both times. First she saw a white light as a very bright flash, then she saw herself on the table and doctors around. But everything is so immense. She also heard everything the doctors were talking about and all the sounds of our physical world. When I asked her, "Were you scared?" she answered, "No. I was very easy and calm." The stories of people who have experienced clinical death are very similar to each other. And so many also told that they did not want to go back, that their own body was like a suit for them. I had foot surgery when I was 8 months pregnant. I had 2 anesthesiologists with me in the whole medical consilium. Anyway, as soon as the surgery started, I fell somewhere. I felt so good, as if I had returned to my childhood and had just come home from school, lay down on the couch and fell asleep under a warm blanket, and no problems and worries. But I was brought back to consciousness without end. I didn't want to go back, I felt very good, warm and calm. I wanted to be left alone, I didn't want to go back, I felt like I was being brought back to terror. I don't know what's there on the other side, I didn't see anything. But that it's good there, good in a way that words can't describe, that's what I know for sure. Once you are brought back a little bit, it is a wild pain. Of course, the soul begins to fight back. The first thing that is felt is pain and nothing but pain. Had a pregnancy, small term, but not a planned pregnancy. And now I have a few days to decide what to do. I decided to consult with a friend, went to visit her. And on the way, the bleeding starts. I didn't want to go to the hospital, so I ran to my friend on the 5th floor. I was young, stupid. I thought, as soon as my period was over, I flew into the apartment and went to the toilet. I was bleeding for hours. Just rags flew out of me, I couldn't stop it. My friend says, "Let's call an ambulance." I'm like, "It's fine." I'm covering my eyes again and falling into darkness. And I see myself walking down some corridor, all my relatives are standing around, my mom, dad, brother, doing something. I went around, I looked around, I saw who was doing what. And I felt so light, as if I had no pain at all. Then I see the doctors came in, sat down next to me and talked to me. And I'm lying there breathless. I watch them and think that finally it doesn't hurt, everything is fine and I don't have to think about anything. I decided to come closer to see. I stand next to my body and the doctors and see them doing something to me. And then there's a sharp pain. An unbearable, hellish pain. And I was pulled back into my body, and I didn't want to go back into it. I woke up and I saw a doctor in front of me who said, "Can you come down?" It was my friend who called an ambulance when she found me unconscious. When I recovered, I told everyone I saw in my vision what they were doing at that moment, when I was wandering on the other side. It was just as I saw it when I blacked out. However, not all clinical death survivors see the same experience. Each person has their own unique experience and perception of this state. I've been on the other side of life and death as a child. And I have a story to tell about it. As my parents later told me, I suffocated in my sleep. They accidentally noticed that I was sleeping and not breathing, and while they were waiting for the ambulance, my grandfather pumped me out. My grandfather told me later that they couldn't open my mouth at all, because I had squeezed it so tightly. And at that time, while my parents were going crazy, I was flying, looking down at myself and my parents. And I was also offered a choice of going back or staying there forever. I made a choice. I said I wanted to go back to my grandfather. Then they were talking at home, thinking that they wouldn't have time to save me, and the ambulance didn't come for a long time. And then I suddenly came back to life. In general, people who have experienced clinical death say that it was the most amazing and unforgettable experience in their lives. Such people realize that life does not end with death, and that there is something more after it. I was under anesthesia during an operation to remove appendicitis. I saw a bright golden room with a huge dome. Inside, all the walls and ceiling were made of bars of gold, looking like bee honeycombs. I sat, looking, admiring this golden light. Then I heard in the distance the doctors' voices, "Alexandra, wake up." And they were getting louder and louder, but I didn't want to hear them and wake up. I wanted to cover my ears and continue to sit in that golden room further. So when people say they didn't want to go back, I understand those people very well. I feel like it was a special room for people who were disconnected from their bodies for a while. My mom had clinical death a long time ago. They didn't talk about it then, so she wrote down her experiences in a notebook. Many years later, she saw the first program where they talked about it and remembered her notes. There was no tunnel, but she saw herself from above, the ambulance, and that she felt very good. When they brought her back, there was a sense of, why? My grandmother ended up in the hospital where she was put into an induced coma. She lay like that all through the New Year holidays. After the holidays she was taken out of this state. And she told us that all this time, allegedly, she was on a ship, where there were masts and sails. And she also told us that she was in the garden. And there behind the little front garden were all her relatives who had long since died. They were singing and dancing, and were very glad she had come to them. She wanted to stay with them, but they wouldn't let her. They sent her back. We were with her almost all the time and didn't want to let her go, really needed her emotionally. My grandmother lived another year after that. One day she went by ambulance to the hospital, washed her head, put on clean underwear, although she felt bad. In the hospital I was immediately admitted to the intensive care ward. We arrived 2 hours later, but we were not allowed to see her. In the evening she was transferred to a regular ward, where she died.